Dear colleagues, you're welcome to Module 4, Policy Making as a Process. We've already addressed 3 modules, and this is number 4 of a total of 9. The content of this blended learning course complements the Toolkit for developing, implementing and monitoring adult education strategies. In the following, we're going to look at policy making as a process. We hope you will find this content useful. On this slide, you will see a list of the partner countries involved in the DIMA project. They are Cyprus, 2 partners, and 1 partner each from Ireland, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Belgium. For more information on the project and the partners, please visit the DIMA project website. At the end of this module, we will expect learners to be able to defend the concept of policy making as a process rather than a product. We will discuss how policy making is not about producing a document only. It is a process of engagement. The second learning outcome is that you will be able to describe the steps of the adult education policy making process. We need to recap on what policy is. Policy refers to a process of decision making, such as a Congress motion, or a product or outcome of an engagement or consultation, such as a white or green paper. Policy can be what government actually delivers. For example, the delivery of services or the enforcement of regulations in education, health, etc. Fourthly, policy may be political, management, financial and administrative mechanisms arranged to reach explicit goals. What policy is was referred to in detail in Module 1 of the Toolkit and made available in the slides previously. You may wish to refer to Module 1 again before you progress. In considering what is and what is not policy making, it is important to consider the following. Policy making is more than the decision itself. It is a process that needs to be organized and managed. Secondly, policy making is the following of a specific outcome, which may become apparent only in hindsight. What this means is that a process of policy making may bring policymakers to a place that they did not expect. This is perfectly in order if it is based on stakeholders, engagement, and the identification of real problems for which the consultation has identified real possible solutions. Thirdly, the policy-making process is not only the formulation of specific goals, consultation and synthesis, but it is also implementation and feedback, and you will see this as we discuss the holistic nature of policy making. Fourthly, policy making is passive and active. Fifthly, policy making is undertaken by all organizations, public, third sector and private, and they need to talk to each other in their own process of policy making. In summary, policy making is a process from intent and conception to the formulation of the goals and their implementation. It is not just the product or the process, both together. However, the process is core to successful policy making. We refer to an excellent text by Thomas Bertland An Introduction to the Policy Process for your further reading. For those of you who have not already consulted the toolkit or have not listened to the slides and voiceover for Module 1, we want to review a definition for policy. Policy is the sum total of actions, from signals of intent to final outcomes. This is a definition adapted from Carney 2011 and gives us the continuum of areas in which policy is relevant, from signals of intent, intending to do something, to the actual delivery of actions and their evaluation. For more detail on this, see Module 1, What is Policy, in the DIMA Toolkit. The partners in the DIMA project are anxious to emphasize policymaking as a process. The policymaking process can be perceived as a process of successive and mutually distinguishable steps. This can be known as the phase model, or is a model of the policy cycle. The stages of policymaking do not just often overlap. They are often inseparable. The identification of a policy goal and the selection of options for action frequently become fused together. Most literature focused on policy making presents the policy making as a logical flow process between particular phases, so that the defining of objectives precedes and informs the appraisal of options. Life would be much more straightforward if things were just linear. However, policy making is much more nuanced, convoluted and complex than that, and we discuss this afterwards. Let us continue in the notion of a linear phased model for this slide. So policy making may be depicted as a linear phased process. Here we have shown one example of this phase model drawn from Brewer. The first step is the initiation of the process. The second step is evaluating options. Third step is selecting the option. Fourth step is the implementation of that option. Fifth step is the evaluation of the policy arising. And then sixth step is the completion of this phase of the process. But policy making may also be depicted as a cyclical process, cycles cyclical. It begins in the agenda setting stage with recognition and definition of a significant public problem and an organised call to government to take some action in relation to that problem. In response, government, or indeed NGOs, non-governmental agencies, may formulate, adopt and implement a strategy for addressing the problem. Analysis of policy effectiveness in turn often reveals shortcomings in the formulation or the implementation, or may show new problems that need to be added to the policy agenda. So this cyclical process brings us from agenda setting to the formation of new agendas. Recapping on the policy cycle that we discussed in Module 1 may help in our understanding at this stage. The policy cycle is made up of 5 steps. The first step is the setting of the agenda and the identification of issues or problems. The second step is policy formulation, the formation of policy. Third step is policy adoption, or another way for it to term it is legitimization, making it legitimate. After it has become adopted and is legitimated, then there is policy implementation. And the fifth step is the assessment or the evaluation of the effectiveness of that policy, often leading to further items for the agenda of policy making. Returning to the complexity model of policy making. It is complex because it involves many participants who have different roles, responsibilities, interests, concerns, and resources. And presently, policymakers are making policy in an increasingly complex, uncertain, and unpredictable world. So it is important that we do not underestimate the complexity of policy making. But it does also emphasize why this is a process that is never complete and must be constantly updated, renewed, and changed. And it also emphasizes why policy makers need the knowledge and skills so that they can make policy in this complex world. So policy making is actually a multi-layered, ongoing series of cycles, adding incrementally to existing policy, as if we were building up a repository over time. We've tried to present this in a graphic where you'll see it growing out from the center, but it's not the center as in the middle. It's the center in one place and it moves out in different directions, layering one on the other as it expands and develops. In that process, some parts are dropped and some parts are picked up over and over again. This is the reality of stakeholder engagement and process in policy making. When we look at the principles of policy making, it is clear that it is not static. It is a dynamic process involving many stakeholders. If it is carried out in open consultation, it encourages and facilitates broader public debate, which is good for the process of policy making, and indeed for the solution of problems. Public debate, though, is time-consuming. Though it is essential, it is time-consuming, and it also draws on resources. But public debate greatly increases the likelihood of adoption of a policy and the successful fulfillment of the whole policy-making process, and therefore the achievement of the outcomes. It is important for us to emphasize that continuous monitoring and evaluation is vital in policy making. And by having the monitoring and evaluation on an ongoing basis, it allows flexibility. We deal with this in much more detail in Module 7, Monitoring and Evaluation. Let us just note for the moment that the involvement of a wide range of actors from the beginning reduces the risk of later conflict situations. When people and a representative width of people are involved in the early stages, there's less likely to be disagreement about the outcomes at the end, or indeed the outcomes being contested. It is also important that monitoring and evaluation can give rise to feedback for those involved, and it is preferable that the policy drafts are presented as an accessible document, which is drafted collectively by stakeholders, facilitated by catalysts. We discussed this in much more detail in the monitoring and evaluation section, but also give examples in Module 9, which is about learning from the experience of policymaking, examples of policies and strategies from a number of countries. So let us review again the elements of policy: the intentions, the goals, the plans or proposals, the programs or strategy, the decisions or choices made, and the effects. We have referred to these and discussed them in Module 1, What is Policy, which is available in the toolkit or in previous slides. The intentions are the purposes of government action. The goals are the stated ends to be achieved. The plans or proposals are the means for achieving the goals. The programs or strategy is the authorized means of pursuing those goals. The decisions or choices are specific actions to develop plans and implement or evaluate programs. And the effects is the intended or unintended effects. If you wish to explore those more, please refer to Module 1. But policy making in adult education is a long process. And it is different because it contains particularities depending on the country in which it is conducted. And that must be the case. It must be tailored to the needs of that particular population and country. It is a process of reviewing all the factors affecting the development of the country, the region, or a particular entity, such as an educational institution, and the subsequent adoption of recommendations for change. We are referring here to policy making that can be appropriate at country level, but also can be appropriate at institutional level, because many adult education centres have already prepared policy, are constantly updating policy, and know that policy is essential for them to be in keeping with the policy of their region or of their country. We suggest that policy making and the process includes everything from the adoption of a new Education Act to curriculum development, to the formation of teachers as professionals, to the kind of continuous professional development work that is implemented at local level, to the action plans that are adopted. So policy is wide-ranging and goes from macro to micro level. This diagram seeks to summarize policymaking in adult education in particular. It suggests a number of steps, linear steps. While it is presented as a cycle, and while that cycle can be deemed to be linear in following one pathway, in reality, as we have noted previously, policymaking is complex and is multi-layered. So there will be many of these cycles going on at any one particular time. However, we can break it down for understanding purposes. The steps are becoming familiar with existing policies, launching the consultation process, summarizing the outcomes, convening working groups, creating synthesis documents, conducting a policy approval process, which will vary from country to country, generating white papers for legislation, which is usually the way it is done at government or at regional level, implementing the legislation arising from the white paper, and then evaluating its impact. Let us now explain a little bit more detail on each of these 9 steps, acknowledging that there are differences in the policy-making process depending on the specifics. The first step is to become more familiar with adult education policies at European level, national level, and regional level. If you are an institution that is designing a policy, then you need to be familiar with all the policies from your level to the European level. The second step is launching the consultation process and gathering together the relevant stakeholders at whatever level you are working. We've referred to this particularly in the stakeholder consultation module. Step 3 is summarizing the outcomes of the consultation process, and we've referred to compiling reports on the consultation outcomes and feeding back to stakeholders in previous modules. Step 4 is convening consultative working groups who will determine priorities with respect to its economic, social, and cultural growth to ensure compliance with the various policy that is already in place, and also respecting the outcomes of this particular process that you have just engaged. The working groups will also assist in determining the priorities that ensure compliance with national consultation processes that involve government, employers, and other educational institutions. And then the working groups will assist education stakeholders to assess what are the issues that need to be dealt with at all the various levels. Step 5 is creating a synthesis document. In many places and countries, this is called a green paper. So the document is created from the results of the consultation or the policy-making process fully. 6 is conducting a policy approval process relevant to that particular country, region, or institution. That leads us to point 7, which is generating a white paper to underpin the legislation. 8 is the implementation of the legislation. And 9 is the evaluation of the impact. The evaluation may be short-term, medium-term, or long-term, but preferably a combination of all. Policy making should include the widest possible range of organizations and individuals. This means involving different departments, government departments, NGO groups, etc., involving particular sectors, education sector, employment sector, social protection sector. The involvement of experts from the field of education. The involvement of experts and spokespersons appointed by various political parties and groupings. The involvement of interest groups. Clearly, the involvement of other adult education providers. And preferably, the optimum involvement of the public, particularly those who interact with the service. We have discussed this in much more detail in Module 3, Stakeholder and Consultations, which you will find in the toolkit and in previous slides. In summary, there are many interpretations of the term policy making. Nevertheless, the policy making process has to be always perceived as a process, which includes many particularities, specific principles, and aspects. There is no one template, but there is a template that can be adapted to accommodate particular needs and settings. And that is the great skill of a good policymaker. We have arrived at the end of Module 4. We have discussed policy making as a process. We have touched on the essentials of ensuring that policy making is not so strict that it does not allow the flexibility needed in a process. We have talked about the phases, and we've talked about how that can be moved on to the actual presentation of legislation arising from policy. We hope you have found this module useful. Thank you.